Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to chat through some things involving the Goodreads Choice Awards. This particular year I think is going to be one of the most interesting if you're a fantasy fan, and I want to talk a little bit as to why I think that's the case. I also want to talk about some changes that I would love for them to implement so that they can make the Choice Awards better. The last few years, it feels like a lot of us have been on repeat. A lot of us have been saying, oh, I hope they do this. And it seems like they don't. So I don't actually expect these things to happen, but it would be nice. And I would love to know your thoughts on not just the things that I'm going to touch on, but also any of your ideas involving the Goodreads Choice Awards. I know some people don't care about them at all. They're like, it's just a popularity contest. Who cares? It's just a way to get people to buy books. And I don't think that those are necessarily wrong opinions by any means. I acknowledge that, yeah, I do think that it coming out right around Black Friday, right around the holidays, I think is a very specific decision that they're making. And I also think that since Goodreads is owned by Amazon, that maybe there's some things involving that. But at the end of the day, I wanted to kind of highlight the things that I think could make them better. So I'm going to start by talking about the two, what for me and for a lot of us have been the things that have swept people off their feet, the things that everybody seems to be talking about this year if you're in fantasy circles. And that would be Sanderson's Secret Projects and Fourth Wing. So here's what's fun about this year. There is no Sarah J. Maas book. You would think that would mean that Sanderson would get it this year because he's probably the next biggest as far as the amount of popularity. And of course, Goodreads nominees and Goodreads Choice Awards did not necessarily mean that these are the highest quality, that this is an objective, this is the best thing ever. I think most of us know that, and I probably don't need to dwell on that point. But anyway, Sarah J. Maas always wins. She always wins. And Sanderson has never won. How many of you didn't realize that? How many of you didn't realize that in adult fantasy, Sanderson has never won? But anyway, Sarah J. Maas always wins, and she doesn't have a book this year. She doesn't have an ACOTAR book. She doesn't have her new series, the Crescent City series. So you would think, but here's, okay, he had 4 books come out. So which one, how is voting gonna go? He's, I'm assuming, gonna have multiple books be nominated. How weird would it be if none of them were? Maybe they'll do like a bundle where all 4 of them will be kind of considered one. So I could see that happening, but I also am like, but they're all so different that I don't really like that idea. So I don't really know how the secret projects are going to work. I would assume they'll at least be nominated. But the other side of this is that if they're not all bundled, then he's going to be pulling votes away from himself. And Fourth Wing is gonna win. Fourth Wing just replaced the Sarah J. Maas book for the year because it's fantasy romance. You're going to see a lot of overlap likely with the people who like one are probably gravitating toward the other. However, Fourth Wing, I realized its sequel, Iron Flame, also comes out in time to potentially be nominated also. Last year, the opening round started on November 15th, and oftentimes, even if a book comes out right before, even though nobody's had a chance really to check it out yet, it sometimes will still get nominated. I think that happened with The Lost Metal last year, but I checked, and Iron Flame, the sequel to Fourth Wing, its release date is November 7th. So I believe, I don't know the exact date that the 2023 Choice Awards is going to start, but I'm pretty sure Iron Flame comes out just before. So I think that Fourth Wing is going to have some of its votes taken away because its sequel will get some of them. I still don't think that's going to keep it from winning. I still think Fourth Wing is going to dominate. And I think even if people want to give it to Iron Flame, they'll want their favorite book to win, so they might still just vote for the first one. Or maybe the second one won't be nominated. I suppose that's possible as well. But I don't know what's going to happen with the fact that 2 of the biggest books that have come out this year, or I should say the authors whose works have come out that have been the big things, there's other works out there. So I think that'll be kind of fun to watch. I don't know how that'll be navigated, but this brings me to my first point and the request that I have mentioned, that other people have mentioned, and that we're probably going to keep mentioning until it potentially happens someday, which is please make a fantasy romance category. Even if Fourth Wing wasn't out this year. Isn't it odd? Because very different. It's its own genre. Fantasy romance is its own genre. It deserves to have its own category, and there's so many books now. It's not like there's only a couple that come out each year, so we don't know where else to put them. Do we put them in romance or do we put them in fantasy? We'll put them in fantasy. It's not like there's only a few and we don't know what to do with them. It's not a tiny little subgenre. It's its own genre. There's so many books. There's a lot of bookstores now that even have entire sections dedicated to fantasy romance. Can we do that now, please? Can we just have it have its own category? And it's not that I want to be clear, fantasy can be so many things. That's part of what makes fantasy amazing. It can be more historical, it can be more satirical, it can be more leaning toward literary fiction, it can be so many different things, and it can be fantasy romance. But because fantasy romance has its own, at this point, subgenres, it has its own tropes that are really focused in on, really utilized, I just think that fantasy they're almost too separate for them to have to compete against each other. It's not the end of the world. It's no big deal, really, in the grand scheme of life if they never make a fantasy romance category for the Choice Awards, but it sure would be nice. A couple of other interesting things to know about some of the powerhouses and big names in fantasy. Obviously, V.E. Schwab. At the time I'm filming this, Threads of Power is not yet out, but I know it's an anticipated release for a lot of people. I know a lot of people are going to devour that book as soon as it comes out, and it's a really exciting entry for the fandom. However, it is a new entry. It's a sequel, and it's the first in a continuation series, so it's not something like Addie LaRue, where it's a standalone and anybody can pick it up and it kind of seeps its way into the general fiction section. This one is very much fantasy. It's very much a return to something. So I'm not quite sure if it's going to pull in the votes as much as it would have if it were something like Addie LaRue. Still think it's going to get a lot of votes. I just don't know that it's going to win, but I'll be really interested to see how that plays out. And then the other big name I wanted to mention would be Cassandra Clare. Typically, I would say this one would have a pretty decent chance of winning because I know Cassandra Clare has a huge audience, and unlike Threads of Power, this is a brand new first entry into a series, so I have a feeling it's going to get a lot of votes. At the very least, I think it's going to be nominated. However, because it's not yet out, I don't know what the reception's going to be, and I know a lot of authors who transition from writing young adult to adult can sometimes have a difficult time getting their footing in that new age range and finding their target audience. So that's something to consider. I don't know, maybe it will do really well and everyone will, for the most part, love it. Or maybe it will have a Holly Black Book of Night situation where not that many people really like it. So we'll have fun waiting and seeing how all of this is going to play out. Getting into just some general predictions for just in general for fantasy, for young adult fantasy, and a couple of other ones that I think will likely pop up in other categories because I just think it's fun to make these predictions. So Happy Place by Emily Henry, I think is probably going to win. I'm not super familiar with the romance scene, so maybe there's another author who's really big. Did Colleen Hoover have something new come out this year? Probably. I don't know. But I could see Emily Henry winning in romance. I think Yellowface has a chance of winning in fiction because it's not just fiction readers who have been picking up Yellowface. A lot of her fantasy readers have picked up Yellowface, and then a lot of other readers have picked it up. And people that don't typically read fantasy, maybe this is their first time reading R.F. Kuang. And it's also just so accessible. It reads really fast. I could see it winning just purely because there's so many different people that are coming to it, but also because it had a ton of backing with marketing. That was everywhere, it felt like. So even if it wasn't your favorite thing by R.F. Kuang, I could see it actually being the thing that gets her a Goodreads Choice Award for this year. I think A House with Good Bones will probably pop up in horror. And then the rest are fantasy predictions. So I'm just going to go through those pretty quick. I think Stolen Era by Holly Black, because it's Holly Black. Also, who forgot that came out this year? I don't think it'll win, but I do think it'll be nominated. I think House of Roots and Ruin will be nominated. Last Tale of the Flower Bride, because Last Tale of the Flower Bride just has the Goodreads nominees feel. It's kind of atmospheric and floaty and very odd, and I think there's always those kind of folktale, fairy tale-esque books in the adult fantasy nominees, so I think that one will be there. I also think that one has, similar to what I was saying about Yellowface, readers that have come to it that maybe aren't necessarily the ones that would generally read that genre, so fantasy. But I think that maybe people who typically read fiction might have picked that one up as well. I think Amina al-Sarafi will be there. It was very popular. It was a big hit this year. Another one that it feels weird to say this year over because it feels like forever ago that it came out. I could see The Crane Husband being nominated for the exact same reason as Last Tale of the Flower Bride. I could also, though, see The Crane Husband being nominated in fiction rather than in fantasy. So I'll have to keep my eye out and see if it is nominated at all, where it is nominated. God Killer, I think, did very well in the UK. It came out in the UK first, and then it's coming out here in the US soon. At the time of filming this, it's not yet out. But I think God Killer will be there. I could see this one being in the debut category, and I doubt it would win debut, but oh my gosh, I would love it if it did, because that is such a good debut. It's shocking to me that it's a debut. It was phenomenal. Song of Silver Flame Like Night, I believe will be nominated in the YA fantasy. I think Bone Shard War has a good chance of being there. I don't think it'll win for adult, but I think it'll be nominated. Thorn Manor, I think this one will definitely, because Margaret Rogerson is very well liked, I would say, and I think a lot of people thought that one was very charming, very cute. Again, don't think it'll win, but I think it'll be there. Encyclopedia Fairies, I think will definitely show up. That's another one where I'm like, I could see it being fantasy romance, but if they were to do a fantasy romance category, I could also see this one being nominated under fantasy, because it kind of could fit in either. I believe The Weaver and the Witch Queen by Genevieve Gornichek will also be nominated. Her other work, The Witch's Heart, I believe was nominated the year it came out. It has, once again, it's a retelling, it's kind of historical fantasy, it's got that feel, and those tend to be very well liked by the Goodreads nominees. And then the last couple, Bonesmith by Nikki Powell-Preto, I think will be nominated in YA fantasy. I would love for this one to get a surprising amount of votes. I know it's probably not the heavy hitters, like the really big names like Holly Black, but I had so much fun with it, and I think that a lot of people are enjoying that one, so I hope it gets nominated at the very least, but I hope it gets a lot of votes too. I think the one that's going to win for YA is A Curse for True Love. It's the third and I believe final book in the Accursed. Oh wait, I was about to say the Bridget Kemmerer one. Oh my gosh, what is the Once Upon a Broken Heart? I know they're right behind me. They're right up there. And then I have more, but I have a lot of editions of it. But Once Upon a Broken Heart, it's the third one in that series. The series is very popular. Stephanie Garber's very popular. So I think this one will win. Now, one that I don't think is going to show up, even though the last 2 years this author has works showed up, is Atalanta. This is the author that wrote Ariadne and Electra. And this is the other thing that I wanted to know. I primarily focused at the beginning on the things that I think will make the nominees interesting this year, but this is kind of bringing everything full circle. I think we are starting to finally come away from so many Greek and Norse mythology retellings. I do think we're starting to see more historical fantasy like The Weaver and the Witch Queen, but I think we're starting to end our, I guess you could say, Greek mythology era for the Goodreads nominees. I think that trend is starting to cool down, and that makes me very excited because it was so prevalent the last few years that it felt sometimes like all the nominees, or not all, that's a huge exaggeration, but it felt like a lot of the nominees were very similar. And part of what I like about the nominees is sometimes it does introduce me to things that I hadn't seen. I think a lot of us exist in our own little book bubbles, and what I like about the nominees is sometimes it helps me get out of the bubble and get introduced to some new things. And I will say, last year, having done similar to what I've done this year, read a lot of new fantasy releases, I really thought when the nominees came around, I was very confident. I thought, I'm gonna have read so many of these, and I had not. And that was exciting. It was exciting to know there were so many more books that I could potentially check out that I hadn't seen much on. So I don't know if I want that to happen again this year, or if there is a prideful part of me that's like, come on, I want to have read most of them. But it is, I suppose, not prideful. It's more just that I like when I actually feel like I've read enough of them to feel confident in, oh, I think this one should win, or things like that. So as we get closer, because it's still quite a ways away, to the Goodreads nominees, I will likely do more videos covering what the nominations are, and then I'll probably do some wrap-up style videos to give you information on them. If you hadn't read any of them, you're wondering which ones might I like, what are these even about? So I'll try to do a fair amount of videos covering them. But anyway, I would love to know your thoughts. I know I was a little rambly here, but I would love to know your thoughts on the nominees. What do you hope that they change this year? What are some things that they used to do that you would like to go back to, like they used to have write-ins? There's one other thing I didn't note because it's not that big of a deal, but when at the end they show the amount of votes, I wish they would show you the amount of votes from the first round, and then for the ones that make it to the second round, the amount of votes, because what they end up doing is they combine them, so it just looks like some of them have so many more. Anyway, point is, let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.